and what goes on media. This is Coming Out Stories. It's a podcast about one of the most important conversations of your life. I'm your host, Emma Goswell. Thanks for listening. And now it's time for a Coming Out Stories first. Now, we've spoken to so many people from across the LGBT spectrum, but until now, we've never spoken to anyone who identifies as asexual. Well, it's now time to right that wrong and hear from Rhian. She works as a bookseller and she gave me a real education and a fascinating insight into what it really means to be ace.
So if you want the full label, I consider myself to be a panromantic asexual person.
So for a lot of people, it would make them go, oh, my head hurts. I don't fully understand all of that. This sounds like new terminology to me. If people are listening and they, this is the first time they've heard those descriptions, how would you explain it?
So I think one of the major misconceptions about asexuality is that it's people just not having sex, which I understand, especially from the title. Asexual is, you would assume, not sex, but that's not the case. My personal preference for the definition is a lack of sexual attraction or somebody who experiences little or no sexual attraction. So it's not just people who don't experience it at all, it's people who experience it not very much. And to understand that model, which is something that I was lacking for a long time, it helps to think of romantic and sexual attraction as separate things, which a lot of people don't have to do. A lot of people, they are the same. If you are sexually attracted to women, you are romantically attracted to women. And for me, that's not the case. I don't experience sexual attraction at all. I've had a lot of fun with people trying to explain to me what it is and how it works. I don't understand. But I am romantically attracted to people of any and all genders, so far as I know, which is where the pan-romantic asexual bit comes in.
I get it. So what's interesting to me is hearing you say that is when we talk about sexuality being on a spectrum, there may be libidos on a spectrum as well. And
absolutely.
Some people are very, very overtly sexual. And don't think I'm totally generalizing here when I say men are generally more sexual. And in fact, trans men will tell you as soon as they start taking testosterone, their sex drive goes through the roof.
Yes.
So we know that there's a spectrum there, isn't there, in terms of some people have got a very high sex drive and some people haven't. So what you're saying essentially is that you're just at the lower end of that spectrum.
I mean, I can be. So sex drive and sexual attraction are separate things. There are a lot of people who don't experience sexual attraction who have a very high libido. It's really difficult, I think, for a lot of people, thinking about them as separate things for the first time.
Right.
Because for so many people, they are all bundled up together. They are all experienced together. If you have a high sex drive, you're probably sexually attracted to a lot of people. But for asexual people, that's not necessarily the case. And being ace doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to have sex or that you're not interested in having sex. And as a young person, for me, that's what confused me for a very long time and meant that I didn't realize I was asexual for a long time, because I did want to be having sex with people, especially people that I was romantically interested in. And I thought that discounted me from being ace. Yeah. And it doesn't at all. I don't experience sexual attraction. But when the whole world is built towards everybody experiencing it in the same way, and on the assumption that everybody does experience sexual attraction, realizing that you don't can be really difficult because you just assume that that's your baseline. And one of my examples for this is when I was probably about 14, I had guessed that I wasn't straight, but I wasn't fully aware of the terminology. I didn't know what asexuality was. For a long time, when I did know what it was, I didn't think it applied to me. And when I was about 14, I remember sitting in my classroom at school, not paying attention, trying to figure out whether or not I would enjoy having sex with a woman. And the baseline answer, I was like, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't. I'm pretty sure that's not a thing that I want to do. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not queer then. What I didn't do was sit there and go, oh, I wonder if I'd like to have sex with a man. I didn't go that far because the baseline is straight. I was like, oh, well, if I'm not attracted to women, I must be attracted to men. That's how this works, right?
I'm guessing this was a maths lesson, I guess. Your thoughts always wander in a maths lesson, in my experience.
It was probably biology, to be perfectly honest.
So when you were 14 then, were, your colleagues, your classmates, your mates would have been saying, oh, I really fancy such and such, this, whether it's a celebrity or whether it's someone else at school. And what was your experience? You couldn't relate. You couldn't have those conversations, I guess. You didn't really fancy anyone.
I lied. I straight up lied. This is one of the things that, as an adult, for a very long time, I didn't realise was an ace experience until I read a book called Loveless by Alice Oseman that came out last summer, which is a coming out story for an aromantic asexual person. So aromantic is you don't experience romantic attraction either. And the book opens with her as a secondary school student, and somebody asks her who her crushes are, and she just picks the person in the room who's the most aesthetically attractive and goes, that one, I like that one. And that is 100% something that I did. And I didn't really know that I was doing that, because my brain was like, that person is objectively the most attractive person in this room. Therefore, you probably want to have sex with them, right? That's a thing. Don't think any further than that. That's just the way it works. It's the same for everybody else. Everybody else also goes, who's the most attractive? That one, I'll like them.
No, it's similar to like a young lesbian I spoke to once. It was like, oh, all my mates fancied someone in one direction. So they just went, well, we all fancy these. So Zayn's left. So then they had to pretend that they fancied Zayn, and even went to the extent of putting posters on their wall. Like, we clearly didn't fancy Zayn from One Direction.
Exactly.
What we get, the lengths we go to.
I know. And the lengths that we don't know that we're going to either. Like at the time, I wouldn't have been able to tell you that that's what I was doing. I had no idea. Sometimes I want to go back in time and give my teenage self a hug and be like, it's fine, you'll get there. Bless. There were a lot of times in my teenage years that, looking back now, are really obvious. Like, this is a moment where I should have guessed. And I didn't, because I didn't know that it existed as a concept. And that's one of the things that I do now as an adult. Now that I know it exists, I am out and loud and proud as much as I can be, especially because asexuality is such an invisible orientation.
Yeah.
I walk down the street with my cis male partner. I'm a cis woman. We look straight. And I haven't always been in that position. I've had girlfriends before, and, we've had that fun kind of, oh, do we feel safe walking down the street holding hands conversation? You don't get that as an ace person. And it means that there are a lot of people I've met in the shop who, especially since Loveless has come out, and this book has been a turning point in my experience as a bookseller. Okay. It has been a turning point for teenagers, because they've come in and they've said, I'm looking for this one specific book. They don't go, I'm looking for a book about asexuality. They don't say that, they're looking for books about like queer identity. They go, I found out about Loveless. Somebody's told me about it. I need to read it. I've had some really wonderful and illuminating conversations with teenagers especially, who buy this book, and when I go, oh, I love this, as an ace person, it really means something to me that it's been done so well and so thoroughly and carefully, and the book is incredible. And they look at me and they go, oh my God, a real ace person.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I've met one person in my life. I'm nearly 50, and I've met one person previously who identifies as a ace or asexual, and I feel like they've been hard to find. I feel bad that I've been doing this podcast for 2 years and we've never had anyone talking about it. And it's not through want of trying or from trying to exclude them from the conversation. It's, I feel like there aren't that many people out. Do you feel like the same, or do you feel like things are changing?
It is definitely changing, and it's changing very fast. The asexual flag has only existed since 2010. Mm-hmm. The term for it has existed for a lot longer. We think it's from around 1970, from the GLF kind of era, but it's really only come into common use since the existence of the internet. I mean, I found out about asexuality through Tumblr, and that is not an uncommon experience.
Wow, okay.
Yes, there are a lot of people. So I was a fandom person for a very long time, and one of the reasons that it took me so long to realise I was ace was that one of my first exposures to asexuality was through Sherlock Holmes, who is quite often presented as an asexual character in fandom, because fandom tends to be quite queer as a space, and there are ace people looking for, for representation. He's not the best choice because he's a sociopath, and that comes with a lot of the stereotypes of asexuality, which is, if you don't experience sexual attraction, then there's something wrong with you, or like for a very long time I thought I was broken. I thought there was something wrong with me and that I was never going to have a successful relationship. I was, never going to learn how to be happy by myself. I did both of those things, by the way, separately.
Good to hear. I feel like there are a lot of stereotypes then. So that's one, is
Yes.
it? That you're sort of a bit of a sociopath, that you're cold-hearted, that
you'll be alone forever, and also that because you will be alone forever, you'll be unhappy doing so, which I personally struggle with because it really undermines the value of friendship, which I feel like is an entirely separate issue. But like, if you're monogamous and you hook up with one person and you spend your life with that person, that doesn't devalue any of your friendships. That doesn't make them worth any less to you. And I think this is a problem that I've had with some friends as well. I've had some very close friends who get a boyfriend for the first time and vanish off the face of the earth because society has this kind of ingrained idea that your significant other is everything you need. They are your romantic person, your sexual person. They are all of your emotional support, all of your physical support. They are absolutely everything to you. And that's very sweet. It undervalues friendship, which is incredibly important and has got me, and I'm sure hundreds of thousands of other people, through the most difficult parts of their lives, even when they were in relationships.
Well, in my experience, friends are around a lot longer than girlfriends have in the past, in my personal life anyway.
That too. I mean, I think part of the problem is if you put that much pressure on one person, that's a lot to carry as well. That's a lot for one person to be doing and for you to be doing for them.
Was there a point where you had to actually, and did you feel like there was a point where you felt like you had to announce this to the world, or that sort of had the moment with the parents, or do you feel that that isn't the conversation that you have with members of your family?
That's the difficult thing. I think because there is so little understanding about asexuality, if you come out to somebody as ace, you have to do ace 101 with them. Like, unless they're really, really clued in, you have to sit down and be like, okay, so this is what I am. And also that's what this is what that means. You can't just say, okay, I'm gay, and then leave it and get on with life. You have to stop and discuss it, which I'm not going to say that it's harder in any way, but when you're gearing up to come out to somebody, you have different things to consider. And I've had a lot of people who I explain to them that I'm asexual. They don't know what it means. I explain to them what it is, that asexuality is a spectrum, that libido and sexual attraction are separate things. And then they ask me about my sex life. And I'm like, okay. We've just met. I'm not going to tell you about what me and my partner do in our private time, what we do or don't do. That's none of your business.
I think most people assume that asexual people don't have partners and don't have sex. I think that's the assumption that I probably had myself, to be honest.
Yeah, and it's absolutely not true. I think I've had probably 4 partners over my lifetime that I would consider a significant other. And very neatly, 2 of them are men and 2 are women.
So you're very pan. Yeah.
Very, very 50-50. The difficulty, especially if you're coming out to somebody while you're in a relationship, is that you're exposing them to it as well.
But people would be very confused, wouldn't they? They'd be like, so what, you're not sexually attracted to anybody, but you are in a relationship and you might be having sex. So it is confusing for people.
There are many other reasons that ace people have sex. Many, many other reasons. Some of them are that your partner enjoys sex and you don't dislike it, so you will perfectly happily do that for them to make them happy. Like you do, you make dinner for them when they come home from work and they've had a long day, that kind of thing. You might want to have children as an ace person, and you might not want to go through the stress and the money that it costs to go through IVF, so you might have sex with your partner. You might enjoy sex. It's not, it's not you are asexual, you don't like sex.
But what you're saying at the core of it is you're not sexually attracted to the person. Yes. You're romantically attracted to the person as a sort of soulmate / friend. You're not getting with them because you just fancy the pants off them and you want to get in the knickers.
Yeah.
It's not about it's about being attracted to the person.
Yes, yeah. For a while, and I don't do this anymore because it doesn't actually make sense, but for a while, it seemed to me the only romantic attraction I could have was to be panromantic. Because if you aren't sexually attracted to somebody, then how does their gender play into it? You know, like that doesn't bother me at all, which isn't how it works. And I'm not going to try and explain how it works because I don't know. It's outside of my experience. Human sexuality and gender is so complicated.
Aren't they?
And I'm, you know.
So when you got together with your partner, then do they ask the same sort of questions then that your parents might do? Do they get confused by it?
My current partner didn't. I've also previously dated ace people, which is really nice. So the word for a non-asexual person is allosexual. So my current partner is allosexual, which means that he does experience sexual attraction. And I feel like this is a thing that a lot of queer people go through. You don't go into a relationship with any of the pre-existing societal expectations that a lot of straight people do. You have to sit down and talk about what it is that you want from a relationship, what it is that you expect from a relationship. And for ace people, that just goes a little bit deeper. My first boyfriend, we did not have that conversation. And throughout the entirety of our relationship, we didn't really have any conversations. We didn't really talk to each other, which was problematic in itself. But it meant that I was coming out to myself and then to my immediate friends and family while I was dating him. And when I first came out to him, he was like, okay, well, does that change anything about the way that we have our relationship? And I was like, no, it doesn't. Like, it is important to me to know that I am not broken and that I belong to a community of people like me who can share their experiences with me, who can support me through figuring out how to use this terminology to describe my experience. But to you, it kind of doesn't matter. It doesn't really have any effect on the parameters that we've set up for ourselves, which was true at the time. Unfortunately, after the breakup, he did leave me with the distinct impression that my sexuality was part of the problem, which is not great. And I feel like that's one of the things that a lot of people are very afraid of as an ace person, especially if you're coming out to yourself and to the people around you while you're in a relationship.
That they're going to reject you for it.
Yeah. Exactly. But in hindsight, I was lying to myself about that relationship because we'd gone into it with all of this, like we hadn't had the discussion about what we wanted from the relationship. We were a straight boy and a straight girl, or we thought we were at the time. And society tells you what that relationship is going to look like. You don't have the discussion, you just get on with it. And one of the wonderful things about being queer is that we don't do that anymore. All of my friends that are queer as well, we have these
books, don't we? We're making our own rules up, aren't we? We make our own families. You know, we're not having nuclear families. It's different.
Exactly. And having those explicit conversations with not just your partners, but your friends as well, means that not only do you have more meaningful relationships because you're open and honest with each other and you know exactly what you're expecting, it means that there's no accidental lying to each other. There's no like, oh, I didn't realize that was what you wanted because you didn't say that, and like I didn't realize that this was what I wanted because I didn't say that, and we've miscommunicated and now we're falling out. Like that doesn't happen anywhere near as much. And I don't think we would have been able to have a successful relationship even if I had been straight, because that was not the only issue that came from the not communicating.
Well, not communicating is definitely a red flag, isn't it, really? But during that, you did mention that you do feel part of a community then. So do you feel that there are more people coming out as ace and that there is a bit more of a tribe of you now? Because certainly 10 years ago, it was never talked about, was it?
Oh, absolutely not. I think we have a joke within the ace community that there's a thing as a gaydar, right? You have a gaydar and you're like, okay, I think this person might be queer. And then there's an ace star where you're like, oh my God, guys, I think this one's ace. It shouldn't be so much more exciting, but it is. And it is because there's really not that many of us. It's especially difficult because for a lot of young queer people, that structure and that framework for community is there. The internet exists. There are queer people on the internet creating internet communities that give you a safe space to talk about these things. And a lot of older people don't have that. And also because asexuality is so invisible, you can't look back in history and go, oh, that person was ace. Sure, you know, there are people who were single their whole lives and never married, and maybe they were aro-ace people, but we don't know for sure, in the same way that, you know, just because 3 women live together doesn't mean any of them were lesbians. But also there are people like me who experience romantic attraction and might be within relationships who are completely invisible in history.
Well, it's like a lot of men who were bachelors who never got married. Then there was always rumours about them being gay. But you're right, they might have been ace.
They might have been ace. They might just have been single as well. We don't know. It's that makes it difficult. The general thinking at the moment is about 1% of the population might be ace, which is, when you think about it, quite a lot. The best example I have of this is when I was at uni, I wanted to be out immediately. From the first day at uni, I had my ace flag on my wall. I was open to people about the fact that I was ace. It became part of my identity in a way that it hadn't been before, because at school, we were aware. I'd shared it with a small group of friends, but I hadn't quite figured out how to come out to my parents.
Did your friends accept it, by the way? Did they understand it?
Yeah. I wasn't the first person in my friendship group to come out as ace.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is what I'm trying to say, basically, that there are so many more of us than people think. When I was at uni, because I was so out and so proud, I can count probably 6 or 7 people who came to me first when they were questioning whether or not they were asexual. And I didn't go to a big uni and I didn't have a massive group of friends. It was just that because I was known and because I was open to talking about it, I became a contact point. In person, I've met more than 20.
Would you say you're an ace activist in a way? Because it sounds like you really do, you approached us and you really do want to speak out about it, don't you? And talk about it and raise the profile of ace people.
It's so important to me. And I think the reason that it's so important to me is that the first time I ever outwardly, out loud, described myself as asexual, I was doing it as an excuse. There was a guy who was following me home, who was harassing me, basically. He wanted to date me, and he wasn't taking no as an answer. And I was aware of what asexuality was. And basically, to me, in that moment, I was going, this is something that you don't have any control over. You can't make yourself attractive to me in any way. Piss off.
Did he get the message?
He did. He didn't ask me any questions about it. And in hindsight, it makes me really sad that the first time I ever described myself out loud as something that is so important to me now, I was using it wrong. I was using it in a way that meant I don't have sex, which was not true. And it wasn't questioned. He just went, oh, and left me alone, which admittedly was the end point.
Well, it just sounds very sad that in his mind, he just went, right, I can't shag her. I'm not going to bother talking to her anymore. I'm not interested.
Oh, exactly. That was his problem. That was the kind of person that he was. I don't want other people to have to go through that. I don't want other people to have to spend years of their life thinking that they're broken or that there's something wrong with them, because there isn't. It's a slow road. I was at uni in an era where the only definition of asexuality in the dictionary was the asexual reproduction of bacteria, not as a human sexuality, which lovely. Is great when you come out to people and they go and look it up and they're like, okay, so you're a bacteria. And I'm like, no. Thankfully, it has now been included in the Oxford English Dictionary and a lot of other dictionaries as a human sexuality. It is an improvement, but it is still included as a sexual disorder as part of the, I think it's called the DSM, the American Diagnostic Tool of like psychoanalysis and psychology and stuff.
Really?
Okay. It's mentioned. So, you know how, I think it was about the 1970s where homosexuality was removed and stopped being thought of. It was
very late on by the World Health Organization, late on that it wasn't considered a psychological
Who are behind the times.
Yeah.
But it's still, asexuality is mentioned in, I think it's the DSM-5, but the only distinction between not experiencing sexual attraction as something that is a disorder and not experience sexual attraction as a sexual identity is whether or not the individual is distressed about it.
Right.
Yeah. I was distressed about the fact that I was asexual for a very long time because I didn't really understand what it meant, and I didn't have a community to belong to, and I still thought that it meant there was something wrong with me. And it's taken a very long time for me to internalize the idea that that's not true. It's an age-old fight of every queer identity of getting society to stop seeing you as broken and wrong and different.
Isn't it? Well, it's interesting you said that you wanted to speak out because you want young people to feel accepted and normal and part of a community.
Mm.
Because the only other asexual person I met was a woman about 5 or 6 years ago. And I did end up feeling sorry for her. She said, I'm really struggling in life because all I want to do is like live with friends and I don't want a relationship. She was very much of that opinion. But she said then all the mates that she lived with would end up meeting boyfriends or girlfriends and going off. And she's like, I don't really want to live on my own. And that's the problem I'm having. I just ending up living on my own. And I don't really want to. I want, a friendship and, companionship.
Absolutely.
And she did feel a bit lost, I think, really. So I just came away from meeting her feeling a bit sorry for her, really, which is not what you want for everybody, is it?
Society is not geared towards single people. I mean, if you've ever tried to rent a flat by yourself, oh my God, it's expensive. But even that, like, there's always this kind of, if you're a single person, society says there's something missing from your life.
Oh, even trying to buy food in supermarkets used to drive me mad. Everything's geared up for like 2 parents and 2 kids.
Yeah.
Everything's family packs, isn't it? And if you just want to buy one of something, it's like, why can't I just buy one for me?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating. And it's one of those things that I think, again, being open, being honest about these things, me being personally loud about it, even though I'm in a relationship and I live with my partner and my cat and nobody else, and we're like a nuclear family unit, me being loud and open about the fact that I'm ace is still helping to open doors for people who don't want to live that life. And there are plenty of people who aren't ace and aren't aromantic who also don't want to live that nuclear family life. I wish the world was better geared towards people who don't want to be in romantic or sexual relationships. This is going to sound very utopian, but I wish we lived in more open communities and place more value on how close our friendships are. Like, if this year has taught us nothing else, is that being able to see and talk to your friends on a regular basis is an absolute lifeline.
Isn't it just? I feel like you should have been a hippie in the 1960s or something. That's that way.
That's what it feels like. That's what it feels like.
Living in a commune or some sort,
That was my dream for a long time. After the end of my first relationship and when I was, beginning to wonder whether I ever actually wanted to be in another one, that was the goal. I still have that kind of vision that me and my partner and a lot of our friends will end up living somewhere. Like, maybe we'll live in different houses on the same street. Maybe we'll, I don't know, build a commune in a field in Wales. Who knows?
That sounds a lot of fun. I've always liked the idea of communal living in a way.
Yeah. There are a lot of things about our society that are a little bit broken and a little bit janky. And I think being asexual has opened my eyes to a lot more of them than I expected it to. But it makes such a difference having that community. The community is what's taken me from going, oh, okay, I guess I'm ace, I'll figure out how to live with this, to I love being ace. I really love it. I wouldn't change it if you paid me.
Well, let's get back to that conversation with your parents then, because you alluded to it, but you said it was difficult because you feel like you're having to educate them, I think, aren't you? And you feel like you're having to, explain everything. I did speak to a non-binary person on this podcast, and they said they actually emailed their mother with a series of attachments to explain, which is not a bad way of going about it. Did you feel like you had to sort of approach it similarly?
Yeah, so this is going to sound ridiculous, but I came out to my parents by accident, not having realised that I hadn't already done it.
Oh, okay. Had you had a lot of gin that day?
No. So I think because I had been out and loud and proud of being ace for so long, I had set up and led with my ace flag the first Pride March at our university, and all of that had been all over Facebook. I'd been to so many queer events and I was running queer spaces, and it was the era of Facebook. I was posting about it all the time. I just thought my parents knew. I thought they'd guessed. Like, we never sat down and had the conversation. But then I went to Australia on a study abroad trip, and I wrote an article because I was so fed up of meeting new people and explaining myself to them and them asking me what I was beginning to get really grated at and felt like were stupid questions about my sex life and like my libido and all of this other stuff that like was completely irrelevant. And people telling me, I don't know why people do this, but apparently sex is what makes us human, even though dinosaurs had sex, and dinosaurs definitely didn't have language.
And it didn't work out too well for them anyway, did it? That's not a great example of anything, is it, really?
But also, this is the other thing about being part of an identity that doesn't have a lot of visibility. If you get angry at people, they push back against your entire identity and your entire group of people. So I wasn't able to get angry in person because it felt like I was doing wrong by all of the people who would possibly be affected by that. So what I did instead was I wrote a really long, tongue-in-cheek, angry article about what it was like to be ace and all of the misconceptions that people have about it, addressing those misconceptions and telling people better questions to ask instead, basically. And I posted it on my Facebook, and both of my parents liked it, and I was like, hang on, have we actually had this conversation, or is this the first you're hearing about me being ace? Because it might be.
I mean, it's always dangerous having your parents as friends on Facebook for a start, I imagine.
Yes. Well, posting that article, I mean, coming out is something that you never stop doing.
Yeah,
there's the first time, there's the second time, there's the, oh God, I haven't stopped counting time. I've been working at my bookshop for 2 years now, and about 6 months ago I found out that one of my colleagues didn't know I was queer. And I was like, what? How? It was a very funny conversation. My parents haven't addressed it with me since.
Oh, so they just liked the post and you still haven't had the conversation?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
I came back from Australia in a QPR, which is a queer platonic relationship, which, I mean, Google it. I don't want to go into it. We'll be here all day.
Okay, no, that's fine.
It's different for every person. But basically, I referred to my QPR partner as my girlfriend because it was easier. Mm-hmm. And my parents spent the entirety of that Christmas referring to her as my friend. And I was like, okay. So you've read the article and you know that I'm queer. And I can't tell whether you're like, okay, well, you guys aren't having sex, which also was not part of the article and would have been a misinterpretation. But you aren't having sex and therefore you're just friends. Or, oh God, we can't cope with the fact that our daughter is queer. Will not mention it. Like, I don't know where that was coming from.
So there's still a conversation to be had by the sounds of it.
Yeah. I'm not entirely convinced that they don't think that I'm straight now.
Because you're dating a boy. Yeah.
Because I'm dating a man. And he's very sweet and very funny about it. When we moved into this house, he was like, where are you putting your ace flag? And I was like, I don't know. I've always had it in my bedroom, and now I have more than just my bedroom. That's my space. And he was like, do you want to hang it up in the living room? And I was like, yeah, I want to hang it up in the living room. So it now sits above the sofa and is in full view and is our background whenever we Skype both sets of our parents.
Oh, okay. So do his parents clock that and understand it, or have there not been a conversation there?
They haven't asked. So his sister is married to a woman and his twin is non-binary. So they definitely know what it means, or if they didn't, they've Googled it.
Okay.
But his parents, I don't know. They're very sweet and they are very accepting of their children. And I think they are quite happy to just let me be me until I'm willing, or if I ever want to talk to them about it. Which, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if I'll ever do. I don't know if I want to try and have that conversation.
Well, I mean, to be honest, as I've always said, I mean, who really wants to talk to their parents or their partner's parents about their sex life in any shape or form? You know, it's just a conversation you don't really want to have, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I've come out to a couple of my aunts and uncles as well, and the conversation with them has tended to revert back to that, like, oh, does your partner mind that you don't have sex? And I'm like, that's not... How many times do I have to tell people that that's not what it means?
Well, I feel like you may be saying it for a long time longer, actually, Rhian, because I feel like the whole world is just sort of catching up to this, well, it's not new, but it's definitely more out there than it used to be.
The words, the language for the concepts are still fairly new, and that's what people are taking time getting used to, I think. Yeah. For a lot of other queer people, it's not necessary to think of your sexual and romantic attractions as separate because they're experienced in the same parcel. And that's quite unfortunate because it does mean that ace people do also get deliberately and unintentionally excluded from queer safe spaces.
So let's imagine that there's a 14-year-old listening to this who may have sat in their biology class yesterday trying to weigh up whether they were gay, straight, asexual, whatever they were, and were a bit confused, but in a similar position to you were. What would your advice be to them?
I don't want to say go on the internet.
But it's definitely an option. Yeah,
it is an option. If you're going to go and look for ace activists and ace people to follow, look up Angela Chen. She's written an amazing book called Ace, which is just one of the best books I've ever read about asexuality. And admittedly, there aren't that many. I think there are 6, but it's absolutely fantastic. Loveless by Alice Oseman, I've mentioned already, is a teen YA coming out story, which is just handled beautifully. I believe its own voices as well. I believe that Alice Oseman is somewhere on the asexuality spectrum. There is an incredible influencer on Instagram who I absolutely love, whose name is Yasmin Benoit, and she is an asexual person who is also a model, an ambassador for Love Honey, a lingerie model. She's brilliant. She's been one of the driving forces behind International Asexuality Day. One of the things with asexuality is that a lot of the people who ascribe to it are people who are privileged enough to be able to find out about it. And in the age of the internet, that is mostly through the internet. Mm-hmm. And it's also people who will suffer less societally for being able to talk about sexuality like this. So the asexual community is skewed very, very strongly towards white women. There are a lot of asexual people who are white women.
That's interesting in itself, yeah.
I think it's a lot harder for men to talk about a lack of sexual attraction. And heaven knows, as a cis person, I don't want to try and get into it, but I can't imagine how much more difficult it is if you're trans or non-binary. So what I would also suggest doing, even if you're not ace, have a look. There's an Instagram account and an Instagram tag called This Is What Asexual Looks Like. And it's just normal ace people taking pictures of themselves and posting them in that tag and on that Instagram, just to be visible, just to be seen.
And is there a mixture there? Have we got people of different races? Have we got more men on there? Yeah,
it is. It's entirely self-submitted, so you can see the skew. But there are men, there are trans people, there are non-binary people, there are people of colour. It's Angela Chen is incredible. Like, one of the things about ACE that I loved so much is how intersectional it is. Like, there's a whole chapter on disability and asexuality, which is something that, again, doesn't happen enough in queer discussion.
No.
It's a fantastic book. But there are resources out there, and if you are able to access them, please do, because actually being able to find ace communities at the moment is harder than it should be.
There is work to be done. Well, I love the fact that you're so passionate about all the books that you've mentioned in particular, and I do feel like you must be working on your own, and it's only a matter of time before we're reaching for the Rhian Pritchard book on our bookshelves, right?
It's happening right now. That is what I'm doing with my afternoon.
I so knew it.
I did creative writing at university, and I did it because I'm not a particularly mathematic person. I'm not particularly good at engineering or science or any of that, but I had this idea that I wanted to do something that made a difference. You know, when you're a teenager and you're young and optimistic, I was like, I'm gonna make a difference. I'm gonna be that person in the world. And I am writing a 3-book fantasy novel where my 2 protagonists are ace and fall in love with each other.
Yes, I love this already. I so knew you'd be writing a book on it. I so knew
yeah. A lot of people have a lot of predetermined ideas about. I was a pole dancer, an out ace pole dancer.
Hang on a minute, say that again. For a long time you were a pole dancer?
A pole dancer, yes. So one of the things that I did when I was at university is that I danced at Pride, and I danced on the pole, and I danced my own coming out story. And at the very end of the song, I had my flag tied to the very top of the pole, and I pulled it off, and I was hanging upside down from the pole with my flag out.
You told your coming out story through the power of dance and pole dancing.
Yes.
Well, I mean, this is just making my head explode.
Again, it's one of those misconceptions that ace people can't be sexy and enjoy sexuality and enjoy sex. And I like being a living embodiment of irony. So
it sounds it. The wonderful Rhian speaking there, and I'm very much looking forward to moving to her commune at some point in the future. It was so enlightening to speak to Rhian, and really interesting to hear how literature plays such a big part in her life and her education. She works at an independent bookshop in Bath, and she also runs a monthly queer book review, which you can read at mrbsemporium.com. That's just the letter B, by the way. And while we're talking about the importance of queer literature, it would be very foolish of me not to mention our own book. Yep, we've got one. Coming Out Stories is edited by myself, Emma Goswell, and Sam Walker, and it's available in all good bookstores. Next time we meet, you'll hear from Jamie in Bristol. He's a musician in the handbag punk genre. Yes, he did invent that, and he told me he had a family friend or a gunkle who first told him he was gay.
When he used to look after us when we were young, when it was just us, he would babysit for me. And we'd dress up in my mother's clothes, you know. He would be the queen mum and I would be the queen. We just would laugh. You know, it was very freeing with him. He never used to say, "Are you gay?" He used to say, "You're gay." But in a nice way, you know.